Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep today into Curis Inc.
Right.
It's a biotech focused on cancer therapeutics, and you sent over a bunch of material on them. We're really zoning in on their lead candidate, Emavusertib.
Exactly. And it's crucial to remember their clinical stage. So everything pretty much hinges on their research, especially Emavusertib.
Right.
These documents give us a good current snapshot data, financials, recent news.
So our mission here is to sift through this for you, figure out what's most important, the opportunities, the risks, what to watch out for.
Let's do it.
So let's start at the top. What is Curis Inc. fundamentally, and tell us about this drug, Emavusertib.
Well, Curis is all about trying to find new ways to treat cancer, innovative approaches. And Emavusertib, or CA4948, that's their main experimental drug right now.
And how's it supposed to work? What's the idea behind it?
Okay, so it's a small molecule you take orally, and its main job is to block a protein called IRA4. Yeah. Think of IRK4 as part of the cell's communication network, involved in inflammation and helping cancer cells survive, through pathways like NFKB. Sometimes these pathways get stuck on. Emavusertib tries to shut that down.
I saw in the notes it hits other targets too, FLT3 and CLK.
That's right, and that's actually quite important. Hitting multiple targets is key. IRK4 is big in cancers with MYD88 mutations, which you see a lot in PCNSL. That's primary central nervous system lymphoma.
Okay.
But the FLT3 part is relevant for certain types of leukemia, AML specifically. So this multi-targeting, it could mean broader use, maybe even tackling resistance.
Got it. So where are they actually testing it now? Which cancers?
The main trials, based on this info, are in acute myeloid leukemia, AML, and myelodysplastic syndromes, MDS, and importantly, that PCNSL indication.
Right, the brain lymphoma.
Exactly. Plus some earlier exploratory stuff in solid tumors, too.
Okay, all right. Let's zoom in on what's been happening lately. The recent news, the financial picture from these documents. What's the current state of play?
Well, the first thing that jumps out, honestly, is the cash situation. As of the end of March 2025, they had about $20.3 million.
$20 million, and they're spending.
Their net loss for Q1 2025 was $10.6 million. That's down a bit from the year before, but still significant. Revenue, mostly from royalties on another drug, Airveg, was only $2.4 million.
So wait, if they lost $10.6 million in one quarter and have $20.3 million...
You see the issue. Their burn rate is roughly $10 million a quarter, maybe a touch more all in.
That means that $20.3 million...
connects directly to their runway. It's only expected to last into the fourth quarter of 2025. Well, that's really soon for a biotech needing data.
Wow. Okay. And they have been raising money, though. I saw notes on that.
They have. They had to. They pulled in about $8.8 million net in March 2025 and another $10.8 million or so back in October 2024. Necessary cash infusions.
But that comes at a price, doesn't it? Dilution?
A big price.
Yeah?
Yeah, huge dilution for existing shareholders. The number of shares just ballooned from around 5.9 million late last year to about 10.5 million by March.
Ouch. So nearly doubled the shares.
Pretty much. Your slice of the pie gets much smaller.
There was also a key hire recently, right? A new CMO.
Yes, Dr. Ahmed Hamdi, appointed Chief Medical Officer in May 2025. And this is interesting because his background is deeply rooted in developing BTK inhibitors.
Like ibrutinib.
Exactly. Ibrutinib, acalabrutinib major ones. And Curis's lead PCNSL strategy combines Emavusertib with ibrutinib.
Ah, so his expertise fits perfectly.
Perfectly. It could really signal confidence and maybe an acceleration of that core program.
But there's also this cloud hanging over them, the NASDAQ notice from February.
Right. Another pressure point. Their market cap fell below the $35 million minimum requirement. They've got a deadline, August 20th, 2025, to get back in compliance.
Which means the stock price needs to go up and stay up.
For at least 10 consecutive days. If not, they risk delisting, making it even harder to raise that cash they desperately need.
Okay, so the recent news is a mixed bag. A key hire, but overshadowed by a really tight cash runway, significant dilution, and this NASDAQ compliance issue.
That sums it up well. Urgency is the word.
All right, let's shift gears to the science, the clinical trials. This is where the potential really lies, right? Here's where it gets really interesting. What's the data actually showing for Emavusertib?
This is the core of the story, and the most promising signals seem to be coming from the PCNSL program. It's a rare, nasty cancer, and for patients who relapse or don't respond to initial therapy, there just aren't any approved options right now. High unmet need.
So tell us about the Take-Aim Lymphoma study, the combo with ibrutinib. What did that January 2025 update show?
Okay, so they looked at two groups. First, relapsed refractory PCNSL patients who had already been treated with and failed a BTK inhibitor, like ibrutinib. A tough group.
Right, their cancer was already resistant.
Exactly. And in that group, 6 out of 13 patients who could be evaluated had an objective response. That's an ORR, objective response rate, of 46%. And 4 of those were complete responses.
Wow, 46% in BTK failed patients. That sounds pretty good. Any durability?
Yeah, that's key. 3 of those complete responses lasted more than 6 months, which is encouraging.
Okay, what about the patients who hadn't had a BTK inhibitor before, the naive group?
In those patients, the response rate looked even better, though it was a very small group, only 6 evaluable patients. But 5 out of 6 responded. That's an 83% ORR.
83%. Mostly partial responses, though.
1 complete response, 4 partials. Still, very high activity signals in a small number.
How does the drug's mechanism tie into this? Why might it work even when BTK inhibitors fail?
Well, that's the fascinating part. PCNSL often has these MYD88 mutations that drive cancer growth through both the IRA4 pathway and the BTK pathway. Ibrutinib hits BTK. But if the cancer finds a way around that, maybe activating IRA4 more or using other pathways, that's where Emavusertib comes in. It hits IRA4 and maybe FLT3-CLK too. It's attacking multiple points.
And critically, it gets into the brain, right?
Absolutely essential for PCNSL. The drug has to cross the blood-brain barrier. The data suggests Emavusertib does this effectively.
Okay, let's talk AML. There was data at ASH in December 24 for relapsed refractory FLT3 mutated AML.
Yes, the Take-Aim Leukemia study. This was Emavusertib monotherapy in patients with FLT3 mutations who hadn't had too many prior treatments, less than 3 lines.
And the results?
They saw 10 objective responses out of 19 evaluable patients, so a 53% ORR. Importantly, that included 6 complete responses, a CR rate of 31.5%. The composite CR rate, including CRs and similar deep responses, was reported around 38-42%.
How does that stack up against, say, gilteritinib, an approved FLT3 drug?
Well, the comparison mentioned in the sources is that gilteritinib's approval study showed a composite CR rate of about 21%.
So numerically, Curis' data looks better.
Numerically, yes. But the really interesting part is who was in the Curis study. They included patients who were more heavily pretreated, even some who had already failed other FLT3 inhibitors.
So it might be working even in resistant cases.
That's the suggestion. The dual IRA-COF FLT3 inhibition might be overcoming resistance mechanisms, and the responses seem pretty rapid, too.
And they're looking beyond just FLT3 mutations, other AML-MDS subsets.
Correct. Yeah. They're testing it in patients with spliceosome mutations, another tough-to-treat group in AML-MDS, showing some early hints of activity there. And they also have a frontline AML trial.
Frontline. So newly diagnosed patients.
Yes, a triplet combination. Emavusertib plus venetoclax and azacitidine. They finished the first dose level safely and are enrolling the next. That's a potential path to a much bigger market, if it pans out.
What about the regulatory side? You mentioned positive feedback for PCNSL accelerated approval.
Yeah, this is a big deal. Both the FDA in the U.S. and the EMA in Europe have apparently indicated that the data from their current single-arm PCNSL study could potentially be enough to file for approval.
Accelerated approval, right. Not full approval yet.
Exactly. Accelerated approval in the U.S., conditional marketing authorization in Europe. It hinges on the data being strong enough, and critically, they need to show that Emavusertib is actually adding benefit in the patients who haven't had BTK inhibitors before.
Which is what that Part C of the study is designed to show.
Precisely. That randomized part is key. But having that positive feedback, that potential pathway, it does lower the regulatory risks somewhat for PCNSL.
So summing up the clinical side, definitely some encouraging signals, especially in PCNSL. The data, while early, looks promising in high-need areas, and the regulators seem open to a faster path.
Yeah, the science seems to be translating, at least preliminarily, into clinical results. That's the hope driving the company.
Okay, but hope needs funding. If the clinical picture has bright spots, what are the major headwinds, the big risks and challenges here?
We keep coming back to it, but the financial situation is the most immediate, almost existential threat. That cash runway ending in Q4 2025 is just incredibly tight.
They need money. Lots of it. Soon.
Tens of millions, yes.
Yeah.
Just to keep operating and running these crucial trials beyond the next, 6 months or so?
And getting that money likely means more.
More dilution, yeah. Raising significant cash now, especially through selling stock, will dilute the existing shareholders even further. It really begs the question of how much value is left for current investors after these necessary raises.
And that NASDAQ delisting risk ties right into this, making it harder to raise money if they can't fix it.
It absolutely does. That August 2025 deadline is looming, It adds another layer of financial pressure and uncertainty.
Beyond money, what about the clinical and regulatory hurdles? That positive feedback isn't a guarantee, right?
Not at all. Drug development is tough. They still have to enroll the rest of those PCNSL patients targeting 30 to 40 more, and the data from that larger group needs to be consistently strong.
And that randomized Part C for the BTK-naive group.
That's critical. They have to show Emavusertib provides a benefit there for accelerated approval. And even if they get accelerated approval, that's not the end. They'll need to run larger, expensive confirmatory trials later for full approval. That takes time and a lot more money.
And competition isn't standing still, presumably.
Right. While PCNSL has a high unmet need in the U.S., other drugs are in development. In AML-MDS, it's already a very crowded field. Emavusertib needs to clearly show where it fits and what advantages it offers.
We should also quickly touch on safety again, the past clinical hold.
Good point. There was that partial hold back in 2022 on the AML study due to rhabdomyolysis muscle breakdown. It was resolved with dose adjustments and management strategies, but it's a reminder that safety issues can pop up unexpectedly and derail things. Plus, the usual manufacturing risks for any biotech.
So, okay, we have promising science, a potential path in PCNSL, but against that, a serious cash crunch, dilution risk, regulatory hurdles, and competition. Given all that, what are the absolute make-or-break milestones we should be watching for? What are the key catalysts coming up?
The big one everything seems to be building towards, is the next major data readout for PCNSL. They're expecting more comprehensive data from that expanded group of 30-35 patients in the Take-Aim Lymphoma study sometime in Q4 2025.
Fourth quarter 2025.
Yeah. And data covering both the BTK-naive and the experienced patients is also expected around the ASH medical meeting, typically late in the year.
And why is that specific Q4 data so critical? It sounds like you're really emphasizing it.
Because connecting the dots, their cash runs out in Q4 2025. So they need that data to be positive, really positive. It's essential to support those potential FDA and EMA filings we talked about. But maybe even more urgently, it's what they need to show investors or potential partners to get the funding or the deal required to survive beyond that quarter.
So the data reveal and the end of the cash runway basically line up. High stakes.
Incredibly high stakes. That Q4 period looks pivotal. Other things to watch are updates on regulatory discussions after that data, how enrollment goes in the frontline AML trial, maybe some early signals from the solid tumor work.
And actually securing that funding or finding a partner, that's a milestone itself.
A massive one. Management says they're looking for partners, especially for bigger indications like other lymphomas or broader AML uses. But time is short. A deal before or alongside that data would be huge.
And don't forget the NASDAQ deadline in August. That's even sooner.
Right. Need to see positive movement there, too.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up. What's the bottom line here? After digging through this material on Curis Inc., we see a biotech with a lead drug, Emavusertib, showing some genuinely encouraging early signs, particularly in tough cancers like PCNSL and certain AML types.
Right.
They've got positive regulatory feedback for a potentially faster path in PCNSL, a high unmet need area. And they brought in a CMO whose experience seems tailor-made for their strategy.
But the potential is seriously overshadowed by the immediate financial reality. The sources paint a picture of a company walking a tightrope. Very limited cash, reliant on dilutive funding, facing huge execution risks.
They have to deliver on the clinic, navigate the regulators, and find the money, all very soon.
Exactly. Successfully enrolling patients, getting that compelling data, convincing regulators, especially for accelerated approval, and, crucially, securing funding or a partnership. All these pieces have to fall into place in the near term.
So the next, say, 12 to 18 months are absolutely critical, particularly that Q4 2025 timeframe with the data and the cash deadline. That will likely define Curis's future.
It really raises that fundamental question for clinical stage biotech.
Yeah.
Can the promising science and early data translate into tangible success, regulatory approvals, financial stability before the clock runs out, especially when the clock is ticking this loudly?
Well, we've definitely covered a lot in this deep dive into Curis based on the info you provided. Hopefully, this gives you a clearer view of the opportunities and, importantly, the significant risks involved.
Yeah, understanding both the science and the financial constraints is just essential for companies like this. Huge potential upside if they succeed, but very real near-term risks along the way.
If you found this deep dive helpful, definitely hit that like button, subscribe so you catch our future deep dives, and turn on notifications. It really helps us figure out what topics you want us to tackle next.
Until the next deep dive.
Keep learning and stay curious.